Hey everybody, Mike Naso here from IPR with the latest on the tropics, and as hurricane season 2011 heads closer to mid-September, things continue to be rather above normal. You can see taking a look out there the last several days, of course we've had Hurricane Katia continue to take that northwest track. It is finally moving north-northwest, should make that turn out to sea between Bermuda and Cape Hatteras. Very, very fortunate that it was at the latitude it was at, that it developed as quickly as it did in order to be kicked out. Otherwise, we would be talking about potentially even a landfall, but that will not occur with Katia as it pulls out. Look at the beautiful outflow streaming on the eastern side of it, a little bit more inhibited on the western side. We do have Tropical Storm Maria out here in the central Atlantic, which isn't looking all that great right now. And to be honest, the prospects for it, you would think, early to mid-September, Cape Verde system pulling on up like this, you would think it would have a really good opportunity to become a major hurricane, and that's just not looking in the cards. The models don't go too crazy with it, surprisingly, and remember, even for Emily, if you can remember Emily, it seems like years ago, the models like the H-WRF made it a monster, and Emily never even became a hurricane. So we'll see if the one that they don't really show much strengthening on ends up being more resilient in the end. We'll talk about that. But the bigger concern, and the first concern we'll cover, is this tiny little blob that was at the tail end of the cold front that helped sweep up Lee, which is now getting swept up over New England. And when you get the tail ends of these fronts over these warm waters, you can always get something spinning. And the Air Force went out about 12 hours ago or so and said, hey, we do have a tropical storm on our hands that could spend at least 4 or 5 days over these very hot Gulf of Mexico waters in very favorable upper level winds. So this is a concerning situation for coastline of Mexico, coastlines of Texas, areas like that. Let's start with Nate because it is closest to land. This is the latest as of 11 p.m. Eastern Time, 10 p.m. Central. Tropical Storm Nate was at 20.4 north, 92.5 west. Winds were 45, gusting to 55, only moving east at 2, not even moving, more meandering almost, and is expected not to really move a whole lot the next day and a half, 2 days, just kind of bend maybe southeast, east, and then eventually back off northwest. And that pressure holding at about 1003, not looking all that different from what it was about 6 to 8 hours ago. However, by Friday, Nate could have an inner core and become a hurricane, and the rate of strengthening could become much quicker after that. As a matter of fact, as it begins that bend back to the west, as the ridging rebuilds to the north, we could see significant strengthening with Nate over the very warm waters, although it is unknown how wind shear will be, say, by the time we get towards Tuesday closer to landfall. There is uncertainty, however. We do, of course, have tropical storm condition warnings out for the coastline of the Bay of Campeche, because there is always the chance that Nate could actually just move inland. There's a chance it could dissipate, and there's the chance it becomes a monster hurricane as shown by some of the models. Right now, I don't think it's going to be a monster, but certainly a hurricane seems somewhat likely, especially given the time it will spend over water. But there's a big difference in track. Nate could easily take the southern edge of this cone. Remember Stan in 2005. Stan moved into the Bay of Campeche, was forecast to become a hurricane and then take a west-northwest track and become a major hurricane potentially, at least a strong Category 2 at least, and literally 6 hours later it was inland over Mexico, having only been able to become a Cat 1. Of course, it was devastating flooding and death from the rainfall there that warranted the retirement of Hurricane Stan in 2005, but nonetheless it took that unexpected curve south into landfall instead of the continued west-northwest. So there is the chance that Nate ends up more on the southern edge. There is the chance that Nate ends up making a more gradual bend, say towards the Texas coastline, or something like this, to where it's kind of Brownsville, Matamoros situation. The most likely scenario is somewhere in northern Mexico, and keep in mind there is the chance that Nate kind of drags east and then northeast and north and northwest and makes a northwest bend, looking as it's strengthening into a hurricane like it's dead on aiming for Texas, But then as the ridging rebuilds enough, Nate actually moves west and then even west-southwest, actually losing latitude before landfall. That is a possibility. You can see the model guidance. The ensembles here are not all that crazy about taking Nate into Mexico. As a matter of fact, they take it into Louisiana and Mississippi in the North Gulf Coast. That would be a whole different situation. We'd be talking about a hurricane heading for the Gulf Coast within about 5 or 6 days. However, the most likely scenario is, again, it stays down here in the Bay of Campeche. And when systems get in the Bay of Campeche here, you have the mountainous lift around it, and in combination with the hot waters and the what is expected to be favorable upper level winds, there could be some good outflow going for Nate, especially within, say, 3 days' time, and that is why it would not surprise me at all if Nate became a potent hurricane before landfall on the Gulf Coast of Mexico. Now when we take a look at Nate this hour, you can see it's not looking all that impressive. Convection isn't decreasing, but it's not increasing a whole bunch either. There is an extreme amount of dry air. Keep in mind, we had a cold front move through. We had Tropical Storm Lee deluge Louisiana coastline, and we also had the low stick around and cause some pretty gloomy looking skies over much of the eastern part of the United States for Labor Day weekend. Anybody who was cooking burgers surely can tell you that it was a pretty dreary day, on and off rain showers associated with what was left of Lee interacting with the front. But at the tail end, you could see the spinning there as Nate gets going. Very elongated, very ill-defined, a minimal tropical storm, but nonetheless still expected to intensify. Here's the water vapor imagery, and look at this dry air. When you get into these oranges here, you're talking a heavy amount of dry air, and unless it gets into the core, it might not have that much of an effect, but even still, it's not exactly what you want to see. And if I told you that, this was a tropical storm, you might not believe me. And if I told you that, there's the forecast track showing that this relatively nasty looking tail end of a trough is going to be a Category 1 hurricane right here, it is hard to believe. So we're going to watch it, because there's always the chance that these things spin up and down very quickly. We saw something like this in 1999 between hurricanes Floyd and Irene that developed in the Bay of Campeche, and it really never became a tropical storm and just kind of teetered out. Of course, this is a tropical storm, and upper level winds are expected to be favorable enough to allow strengthening. Now, I should note about the models, the model guidance here, this is the GFDL, and this is in 5 days, and you can see it takes Nate as an extremely dangerous Category 4 hurricane into the Mexican coastline. This would cause extreme damage in the northern eye wall as it pulls on through. Looks a lot on this resolution like Hurricane Brett did when it moved into South Texas way back in 1999. And if you want to see the progression, you can see in about 24 hours, Nate is still only a minimal tropical storm, and in about 36 hours, still only a minimal tropical storm, and then finally about 2 days from now, so we'd be talking about Friday night, Nate becomes a Category 1 hurricane. That is a lot more realistic than the HWRF model, which essentially has Nate becoming a hurricane in about 5 hours, which you saw the satellite, it's not happening. And then, of course, the GFDL model shows Nate continuing to strengthen at a very quick pace, making that northwest motion, and then eventually a bend back west. But that is a nasty Category 4 hurricane bearing down. And, of course, if that track were to be more to the north, then we'd be talking about a significant threat. But again, we're not even sure right now exactly where the track will go and exactly how strong Nate will get. You can see the European model also, look at this, brings Nate in a couple of days as a very intense hurricane, and look what it does with Maria north of Hispaniola with some building heights above it, and it stays weaker, moves further west. So then we'd have to deal with Maria down the road. Now, where is Maria? Let's talk about Maria, because everybody seems to be forgetting about her. Here's the latest as of 11 p.m. Eastern Time is at 13.4 north, 46.2 west. Should note that the watches and warnings for the islands, you should be battening down the hatches because we're talking about, say, 36 hours or so before the onslaught of the tropical storm conditions would be getting closer to you and impacting you. It is forecast to remain a tropical storm as it moves west at 23 and then eventually a bend to the northwest based on the model guidance, but keep in mind it could be much further north following Katia. It could be much further south, taking more of a track like Irene did into the Bahamas. Of course, Irene was a hurricane by Puerto Rico right now. This is not expected to be a hurricane. If it does become one, probably later, and this track, although you shouldn't focus on the center, either way you slice it, this cone certainly implies some sort of northward motion at the end, which means the likelihood of Maria being a threat to, say, go through the Bahamas or bend back west into Miami as a major hurricane, even though it's September and a very active year, that doesn't seem to be in the cards. You can see the current motion would continue it even south of Jamaica on a track like Hurricane Dean at the speed and current motion. However, it is expected to bend further north, although you'll notice some of these ensembles acting pretty crazy here, showing some erratic motion towards 5 days out. The general consensus is right on up with an eventual curve towards heading out to sea. Now when we look at Maria this hour on the Caribbean satellite, you can see it bearing down. You would think it looks rather foreboding, but actually the center is displaced to the west of where most of the convection is, and you can see the upper level winds are just not that favorable. We have a lot of wind shear, especially from the east side here of our much more foreboding Hurricane Katia. And speaking of Katia, I did want to turn to that because Hurricane Katia, as of right now, has winds of 80 miles an hour, had been up a Category 4 hurricane, has been weakening steadily the last several days, but kind of leveled off. It's at 30.8 north, 70.0 west, north-northwest now at 12, 982 millibars, and it is forecast to continue moving north, and then by the time Saturday morning comes along, be moving out of the picture, and by that time, all eyes will be focused on Nate. Taking a look at Katia on the satellite right now, you can obviously see that it is sheared badly. You see that break there on the western side, kind of that moon shape that we often see with these systems struggling with dry air and wind shear. You can definitely see the pattern off the east coast. That is a protective barrier against the hurricane, which essentially means there's no way Katia is going to make it towards the United States before it turns out. So we're not going to have to deal with Hurricane Katia, even though, say, a week or so ago it looked like, hey, it could be another close call. Not quite. Upper level winds, you can see Maria's under a bit of shear here, actually a good deal of it, and you can tell the pattern here on the eastern side of Hurricane Katia, along with the troughiness in the Atlantic, shearing Maria. In contrast, we have decreasing shear over Nate, and that's what's causing the expectation of strengthening with it. Katia is going to be moving out, so intensification not that likely. So, in the final analysis, Katia is out, is going to be captured, and it will not come back as a hurricane anymore. Maria is going to be bearing down on the islands, could make landfall on some of the islands, but probably won't have a chance to be a hurricane, but watch it. It did burst pretty good today, and if it gets a good significant burst over the center, if it slows down a bit, if some of that shear decreases, it could surprise us and become a hurricane before landfall. Generally, the thought process is that Maria is going to move either through or just north of the islands, north of Puerto Rico, and then east of the Bahamas, but further west than Katia. You see where Katia is? There's Bermuda. There's the eastern seaboard of the U.S. So Katia could make that turn again, but it still has the potential to completely miss land. Don't forget about that. It needs to keep a close eye on it for sure. And finally, we have Nate here, which is forecast to be a potent hurricane and get close to impacting northern Mexico in 5 days, but the track is uncertain. So everybody on the Gulf Coast, especially from the Florida Panhandle all the way down to Veracruz, Mexico, and with the highest level of alert, say from Corpus Christi down to Veracruz and the western Gulf Coast, needs to keep a very close eye on Nate. So we're still watching Katia, we're watching Maria and Nate, but right now the main focus will be turning to our two tropical storms, Maria and Nate. I'm Mike Naso from IPR. I will see you next time. Take care.